Got
Carrie,
it.
Coon and Morgan Spector star in The Gilded Age on HBO. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. I wanted to start with a question about your two characters who are so ambitious and ruthless and perhaps even unscrupulous. But what's so amazing about your performances are they are so endearing. The audience just absolutely adores them. So I wanted to ask you, are there any traits of them that you personally admire, or what do you just appreciate about Bertha and George? Let's start with you, Carrie.
Well, I certainly agree that the marriage is the thing. And I happen to have a very good and healthy marriage myself, where my partner is my biggest champion. And I know that Morgan has a real life marriage where he's his wife's biggest champion. So that part of it feels very organic. I suppose you have to have a degree of ruthlessness to make it at all in this business. So maybe I have a shred of it. But I do admire Bertha's kind of no nonsense approach. She really cuts through the bullshit in a way that I wish I did in my daily life.
Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, I have to second what Carrie said. I think the way that these people treat each other in their marriage is really the thing to admire about them. And I think, I mean, I have a soft spot for George's affection for Gladys. I mean, this is a time when, families were very transactional in how they sort of disposed of their children and how they used them to advance their interests. And George has a real romantic side to his aspirations for his daughter, in that I think he just wants her to really find love and be happy, which is what he's done. I mean, I think that's the thing, is he's realized in his own life the value of a love match. So yeah, that's
totally disinterested in that.
Yeah, no, it's not really your scene.
You both worked with so many incredible writers, or have worked with the writing of some wonderful playwrights and TV writers: Edward Albee, Arthur Miller, Damon Lindelof, Noah Hawley, David Simon. I mean, incredible writers. Talk to us about working with Julian Fellowes. What is so unique about his writing, and what is it like to say his words and perform his words? Carrie.
Well, I'll say that the words are elevated. There's a real style to what he writes. And sometimes it's hard to find your way. It takes a little while to find your sea legs, as it were. So I think we settled in partway through the season. And what always impresses me about Julian is that he knows his audience. He knows what they want, and he's really good at delivering it. And as he unpacks this world, he is very good at directing our attention. And a character that you thought perhaps was making a fleeting appearance will somehow reappear with a more elaborate backstory and become central to the plot. And you didn't really see it coming. And I think he's just really good at enriching the world constantly as those seasons go on. That's not easy to do. And I think it's very impressive. He really knows who he's making the show for, and he knows what they want.
Mm. Yeah, he's sort of a mosaicist. I mean, I think you sort of come to realize as you work that, like, every scene you do is like, it's all part of this sort of steady accumulation of fact and feeling that ultimately adds up to something that's delightful and powerful and quite rich, actually. And so it sort of frees you as an actor to just focus on your little piece of it, and not worry about so much about everything, because it's he's got this kind of overarching structure into which everything is being placed. And yeah, I mean, I would second what Carrie said about the style. It's sort of like, I don't know, I think it's true of every writer. You sort of have to figure out a way to sort of come into their world with your language and your body. But yeah, he's, it's high style in some way. It's exciting. It's fun. You're being asked to reach a little bit. I think that's actually that's a fun challenge as an actor.
Absolutely. Carrie, you mentioned a minute ago these characters' backstories, which are so rich, and we get some kind of hints of, Bertha's origins, which are maybe a lot more humble than we see George and Bertha now. How much do you know about Bertha's backstory, and what have you kind of filled in for yourself as you've been exploring the character?
Well, you're going to expose me now, because I'm an actor who, the older I get, the more I believe that everything I need is on the page if something is written well. But we have discussed that Bertha's clearly upper middle class. She probably came from, maybe there was some some Southern money in there, maybe some lost fortune, and she had some ambitions of marrying well. And I think she set her sights on George before he was entirely successful. I think she saw his potential, and I think it was mutual. I think they felt that they could really take over the world. And And as Morgan said earlier, it was definitely a love match. I mean, it's a very sexy, ambitious, and egalitarian marriage in a time when that was very uncommon. But of course, we also hear them make fun of her. You know, she's an Irish potato digger, essentially. I mean, she's an immigrant herself. I think that's part of what gives her the attitude of that I deserve to be here as much as the next guy, because I've worked really hard to get where I am. This is not something that I, inherited. They're really self-made, and I think in that way she has respect for the scrabblers out there who are trying to climb to the top, and she doesn't feel like those arbitrary rules are fair. And so she'll play by them, but she'll definitely point them out and make sure you know that she's playing a game, and that she thinks she's better than you. So yeah, I love that. I myself come from humble, lower to middle class background, and sort of got out of my hometown. And that's a part of Bertha that I really relate to, because I think there are two types of people: the people who are going to leave and the people who are going to stay. And there's no value judgment. But I was a person who was going to leave, and I think Bertha was the same.
Yeah, and Morgan, we see early on in the season the dire consequences of George's, schemes and ambition. So I wanted to ask you, when Mr. Morris dies, how does that? Do you think that affects George? How does it affect George? And for you, does that change how you, play the role once you kind of realize on the page, the kind of stakes of what's going on?
What it changed for me was I think I sort of started out, first approaching this material with a slight fear that we were going to be glamorizing a sort of a tranche of society that really benefited from exploiting and immiserating many people, and that we wouldn't feel the cost of that. I was concerned, and so I was really thrilled, actually, that really early on in the season we see that yes, these people are exciting. Yes, they're ambitious and they're rising and they're dynamic, but there's a cost to it. And I mean, I think it's really interesting watching them navigate it, because I do think that there is a sense in which, George is deeply troubled by what has happened, but at the same time, it's all in the game. I mean, this is what happens, and people win, people lose. Their fortunes rise and fall really dramatically in this era. And, I think, again, to come back to their marriage, I think part of what distinguishes the Russells from the Morrises is that the material circumstances of the Morrises' life undergird their relationship in a way that I don't think is actually true of the Russells. I think what Bertha says to George early in the first season is true, that if it all fell apart, they'll build it again. And as long as they have each other, they'll get by. And I think that is the sort of, maybe George's salvation when it comes to the high risk gambling that his life consists of.
Yeah, and let's talk about kind of the threat of everything falling apart, because Morgan, we see in the second half of the season, George is really up against the ropes. He's got potentially criminal charges and the train derailment, so he's really in a situation we don't quite see him at the beginning of the season. Talk about kind of finding the vulnerability for the character, and how exciting is it to play George kind of cornered and having to fight his way out of a hole.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's fun. I mean, and I think this is, as we're shooting the second season now, I'm sort of feeling this as well, because I think George is being challenged again. I won't say how, but George is in many situations that are really asymmetrical. He connives to have leverage over people, and then he exerts his power over them in a really decisive way. It's like the Napoleonic model of warfare, something like that. You only attack when you have an extreme advantage. But so it's fun, when that situation is not is more challenging. And I think, what I remember feeling while we were shooting that scene is that, or those scenes in that arc in the first season, is just this sense that George is actually really alone. Bertha is preoccupied with her pursuits, and when it comes to steering his company through these sort of this narrow channel, it's really down to him. And there is I think there is a kind of madness to that situation. As I don't know, you see all these CEOs today, these guys who you see, they're like Elon Musk with his whole Twitter deal right now. And he's really, he's, whether it's to a purpose, whether all of his sort of, Twitter drama is, cunning and Machiavellian, or whether he's just gets a little loony sometimes with how much power he has and how singular he is in the world. I don't know. Yeah, there is something fascinating about like the isolation of that kind of power.
Yeah, no question. And Carrie, something I love about Bertha too, especially as the season goes on, as we're talking about, is as close as George and Bertha are, she keeps some of her kind of ambitions to very close to the vest. You know, she doesn't always tell George, you know, what she intends for the kids and whatnot. So just wanted to ask you, what do you think is kind of Bertha's end game? Where does she envision the family? You know, what is the next stage for them?
What I love about the relationship is that they're running on parallel tracks. Morgan's character, George, is taking care of the business end, right? And their fortune. And Bertha's in charge of making sure that they're rising equally in the social sphere. And her responsibility is primarily to make sure that her children make a good match, as Morgan was pointing out earlier. And so, because she can't be a CEO or an entrepreneur or a senator, that's the only place she can put her energy. And by God, is she going to make it happen? And so, what I would describe in their marriage is something that my friend talked about with his kids. He said, in our house, there are no secrets, but there are surprises. And I feel like that's the dynamic. She's not really keeping secrets from George. She'd tell him anything he needed to know, but there are surprises. And I think that's part of what keeps it dynamic and interesting, and what makes their ambition sort of foreplay sometimes with each other, keeping it kind of exciting. And so that's fun to play too, because in a way, she gets to deal with him like other men deal with each other, and it's, well, women maybe are more cunning and ruthless psychologically ultimately anyway, but that's the only sphere she's allowed to work in. And so, she's got a cold eye and she's really single-minded, which is something I love too, because I love a good flaw. I don't care about being liked.
Yeah, that's great. You've both done a lot of stage work, some wonderful stage work. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, A View from the Bridge. I mean, so many great shows. And this show is very theatrical. I mean, the ensemble is full of theater actors. It's so delightful, for fans of the stage to see, just the incredible ensemble. But I want to ask you too, the characters are quite theatrical too. I think George and Bertha in particular are really, very theatrical characters. So I just wanted to ask you both, does your experience on stage help you find these characters? Are there roles that you've played on stage before that you kind of look to for inspiration? Let's start with you, Carrie.
I would say 4 years of summer stock Shakespeare out in Wisconsin's pretty good training ground, only because you do have to inhabit characters in a space like that with size, but truthfully. And it's kind of interesting to see in the world of the Gilded Age, where the sets are so elaborate and the costumes are so detailed, how much it can take, like how much size the world can actually hold. And what I loved about those years is that I had to wear a corset for, many, many hours, and it was 90 degrees and there were mosquitoes. And, this feels very cushy compared to that. So I don't mind wearing a corset for 16 hours instead, because I'm in the air conditioning. Someone can get me out of it. I'm not getting myself dressed. So, and I also think just voice work, things like being able to make choices about how a character sounds. I think that's the kind of training ground that I think of when I think of the theater. And I think of acting with your whole body. And like it or not, I mean, Bertha sachets around in those period costumes in a way that maybe people think women shouldn't, but too bad. It's a choice I'm making. And I think theater is great for that. It just requires your whole body to tell a story. And I think these worlds also require that kind of size and awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say I agree. The world and these spaces really invite you to be, I don't know, I find in my contemporary life, like I almost never speak. I never speak as well as I can speak. And I never use like my whole voice when I'm in normal conversation. And this show asks that you bring like your full embodied self. I think Julian's writing invites that. I think these spaces invite that. And it's actually really satisfying. It's really nice to sort of live in that space a little bit, because you go, wow, like I'm walking around with all of this size, all of this sort of, power in my body that I get, that I don't, we mostly don't use because it's sort of weird. You wouldn't, but it's nice to be in a space where you get to do that. And yeah, it's also just nice. I mean, to be in an ensemble of theater people is a pleasure. Like it's just, I mean, these are the people who I was like, oh, these are the legends of the theater. Like when I was a young actor in New York, like, and now they're just walking around our set and we're bullshitting with them backstage. And, you know, it's insane. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, it must be delightful. You've been talking about this the whole time, but I just want to ask more about George and Bertha's relationship, because as you both said, so supportive in a way that's so kind of endearing and really quite charming, and really kind of endears us to the characters who, as you said, Morgan, you know, are doing some, you know, unscrupulous things. So I just wanted to ask you both, you know, what do you think makes them such a great match? Because really, even in the moments in the season where, you know, they're not seeing eye to eye and there's tension, you know, it's very quickly resolved. They really kind of are always have each other's backs.
I was just going to say they really are on the same team. It's a united front, no matter what the conflict. And we've joked about this, but unfortunately it's true. We've reached an age where basic respect is really sexy. And I find that really sad. But people are really titillated by this marriage because it's respectful in a time where that seems to be hard to come by. And I think, you know, that's not nothing. And I also think that ultimately at the heart of it, what they're doing is taking care of their family and themselves. And I'm afraid I don't know a person who can't relate to that, especially in the world we're living in right now, where maybe you're forced to make some unscrupulous decisions that aren't always for the best, in the best interest of the collective good, because you're looking out for your children. And that has really serious consequences. You know, it reverberates through our society, but unfortunately, people are ultimately biologically self-interested. And so I think there's something about us that's actually just fundamentally really recognizable. And if you see other people being terrible, you don't feel so bad about the decisions you're making.
I also think they're just, you know, there's something really, like in a relationship, there's something really sexy about both partners having their own vector, right? Like both people are, you know, deeply invested in pursuing their own objective and sort of self-actualizing in whatever way that is. And I think when you have two people who are doing that really in the fullest sense, it maintains a kind of productive tension inside a relationship. And that's really there for both of these people. And I also think they, you know, they believe in each other completely, right? Like I find this in my own relationship, like it's very difficult to have absolute faith in yourself. I think some people you can, like Tom Cruise does, and that's, you know, like that's part of what makes him so amazing. But you know, I envy that. But I find it easier to have like absolute faith in my partner, and you know, that I think that's how these people sort of see each other. And you see that at the end of season one, like George is really on the rocks and he's struggling and he's sort of terrified that he's going to lose his company and his freedom. And Bertha, I don't think she's like, it's gonna be fine. Like, you're gonna be fine. You're you. It'll work out. You know, there's something to that I think is really wonderful.
Before I let you both go, I know you're in the thick of production on season 2, which is very exciting. Any teasers or spoilers you can give us about where the characters are going, or, you know, things you're excited to see? You know, if you can't share anything, which you probably can't, you know, is there anything you hope to see happen for your characters in season 2?
Lin-Manuel Miranda has written a rap for Mrs. Astor that is just phenomenal, and I can't wait to see it.
What a terrible liar you are. If you can believe it, the costumes have actually leveled up. I'll say that. That's something I can share. I just want to take this opportunity to say that our design teams are extraordinary. Kasia Walikamamon and her team, Patrick and Isabel, and our hair and makeup team, Sean Flanagan and Nikki Lederman. They're just, I can't say enough about how they contribute to the world that we're making, and that the fact that they all came back to us is such a gift. And it says a lot about the dynamics on the set and just the way that it's being produced. And we're really grateful to be a part of something like that, where everybody's just really glad to be there.
Yeah, no question.
What, he wants to know what's happening. Tell him what's happening.
It's bigger and richer, to be honest. Like, I know the show is very sumptuous in the first season, I thought, but we actually had some COVID limitations that we couldn't be kind of as grand as the show wanted to be. And I would say the world is like even more, it's even more excessive than it was in the first season, which is hard for me to imagine, but I can't wait to see it. So.
Well, we can't either. Carrie and Morgan, congratulations on the first season of The Gilded Age, and thanks so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.